Hello, and welcome to this week's Bible study. As always, I like to start with a quick breathing exercise where we just take 3 deep breaths, okay? Let's do that now. So a deep breath in, out, in, out, in, one more for good measure. All right, so after the deep breathing exercise, I probably shouldn't be so hype after a breathing exercise. After a deep breathing exercise, I like to play a quiet worship song where you can either keep your deep breathing, maybe quietly sing along to the lyrics, sway along, whatever gets you into that meditative headspace, do that. And then you will be in a meditative headspace when we're done. Unfortunately, I cannot play it here for copyright reasons, but for those on YouTube, if you just go into the link in the description and you follow the quiet worship link, you can actually just pause this video, watch that, listen to that video, and listen to the quiet worship song, and then when you're done, you come back. I hope I didn't butcher that with grammar, but that makes sense, yes. So pause this video, listen to the quiet worship song, and then come back. And then for those on Facebook, you just scroll down. But for those on YouTube, click on the link in the description, okay? So if you want to pause this video, you can pause the video to do that right now. And you're back. I hope you enjoyed it. I don't know how you couldn't, because this week's quiet worship song was a Dolly Parton song, and who doesn't love Dolly Parton in some way or another? Alright, so before we get into the teaching, I want to do just like a little pre-written prayer, you know, the little ritualistic prayer that I do, and I'm gonna do that now. Okay. Oh God, thank you for bringing us all here tonight. Please guide my tongue and heart during this teaching, and guide everyone during the discussion and prayer time. Help us to be a reflection of your light by enlightening us to your ways with love, patience, and curiosity. We love you, God. Help us to love each other like you love us. In your name we pray. Amen. Alright, so quick update before we get into the study, or quickish. I made a website that I'm going to be posting all of my sermon notes to. It's not exactly a transcript, but it's pretty close. It's what's on these pages that I read from. So for those who prefer reading over hearing and watching these videos, the link under the worship links, that's, you know, titled sermon notes, pretty straightforward. Those are for you. All right. Probably very, very slowly, I'm going to be posting the notes for previous studies and linking them like all together, but it's something I need a computer for. So, it's going to be a while, but this study, as well as the first 3 studies, are on that website for your viewing pleasure. So, there you go. Yeah, so moving on to the study part. So we're switching over to the Christian Standard Bible version for this next 5 blocks of chapters. I'm thinking that I should start doing these like quick bios for these versions when we switch, so we have some context for where these translators are coming from. So for the CSB version, as it's acronymized, I'm pretty sure this is the version that Preston Sprinkle prefers. Fun fact for those Theology in the Raw fans. It was made around 2016, 2017. And there was an update for 2020, but I'm not sure if this is the updated version or not, but it's a pretty recent translation. But this is itself actually a revision of the 2009 Holman CSB version. There is a little bit of a debate as to whether one should translate directly from original manuscripts or whether one can simply improve upon a more recent modern version. Even though this is a revision of a 2009 version, CSB does seem to also cross-reference from the original manuscript, which I think is wise. One of these days, when I'm better situated, I'm probably gonna make a video going over all of the different translation philosophies. But for this brief description, CSB takes what is called the optimal equivalence approach. This means that they're going to strike the balance between staying true to the original text, but also making it as easy as possible for the modern English reader. This is the more popular of the translating philosophies. I certainly think it is the most practical and respectful, but I'll let you decide for yourself how you feel about it as we start reading through the chapters. So without further ado, let's begin with Genesis 26 of the CSB. So it starts out. There was another famine in the land in addition to the one that had occurred in Abraham's time. So, quick note, even though this was the land flowing with milk and honey, it was still susceptible to famine, it seems. I wonder if it's maybe because this isn't the land of milk and honey yet. Perhaps it's a land like all the others until about 500 years later, when the Jewish people are finally ready to claim it for themselves, or if maybe even after this time it was still capable of fault. I don't recall any random famines after Israel was formed, but I guess we'll see. But for now, this promised land seems to have a famine every generation, and I just wonder the significance of that. It's almost saying that the land, it's almost as if to say that the land itself is fighting against the Hebrew people, like trying to lure them away from it, and I have to wonder what the force is behind this luring. Is it a test or is it temptation? Or maybe it's just a simple example of things being given before it's time for it to be taken. I'm trying to very subtly fix my hair because it's bugging me, and I just can't do it subtly because I need to look at myself as I fix it. I like to have it that perfect part, and I just can't do it. Anyways, let's just move on. Sorry for that interruption. Anyways, where was I? Yes. Is this just an example of things being given before it's time to be taken? Trials and tribulations, forged in fire, but you had it all along, that sort of thing. I'll leave you to ponder that for now, but let's move on to the next verse that explains what Isaac did in response to this famine. Let me just take a sip of this before I do. Okay. And Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines at Gerar. The Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land that I tell you about. Stay in this land as an alien, and I will be with you and bless you. For I will give you all these lands to you and your offspring, and I will confirm the oath that I swore to your father Abraham. I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of the sky. I will give your offspring all these lands, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed by your offspring, because Abraham listened to me and kept my mandate, my commands, my statutes, and my instructions." So Isaac settled in Gerar. So according to commentators, Isaac was heading south towards Egypt and when God spoke to him, and Gerar happened to be on the way to Egypt from where he was and that's just where he happened to be when God stopped him. So here you'll see him promise to continue the covenant, he had with Abraham, with Isaac now, land, numerous descendants, and an extra secret surprise blessing for all the world that comes from him. Ew, I wonder what that's going to be. So when Abraham left Canaan for similar reasons, when Abraham left Canaan for similar reasons, God did not stop him or even say anything about it, really. But for some reason, God is insistent on Isaac staying. And one must wonder, why? Why does he want him to stay? Maybe he was trying to get Isaac to avoid making the same mistake as Abraham did when he went to Egypt and pimp out his wife. Though, as we'll see momentarily, this was only semi-successful. And if you'll recall, Abraham had pimped his wife out in Gerar as well. Though, to be fair, there is some debate as to whether this actually happened, or if the writers just repeated the same story with different characters and locations for some political reason or philosophical reason, who knows. But regardless, it doesn't seem especially likely that God was trying to get Isaac to do anything besides stay within Canaan's borders. Maybe it was just an exercise in obedience, or at least faith, as no one can really obey perfectly, but faith is what keeps the covenant going. There's still no practical reason outside of its own sake, though. The best explanation for this is that God was simply trying to continue the list of parallelisms between Isaac and Jesus. Much like our current protagonist, Jesus never really ventured far outside the confines of Israel during his ministerial years. I can talk, I swear to God. In his own words, in Matthew 15, he was only here for Israel. My guess is this was another flex of God's power, more to show how a small and insignificant bit of land in that time, which housed such a small ministry, could grow to essentially take over the world. But going back to Isaac, his life is meant to mirror Jesus's in many ways. Not because he could be the Messiah, but because he couldn't be. His life was meant to show not only what was to come, but why it needed to come. But showing what was meant to come also meant never leaving the land that Jesus would preach to, even if Isaac felt the urge to, because if Jesus doesn't leave, then he can't leave either. And yes, that sounds cool, how God weaves this historical story so artfully, but it doesn't really have a practical reason beyond that, does it? Jesus would still be the Messiah even if Isaac left Canaan. Maybe God wouldn't have passed the covenant through Isaac had he disobeyed him so directly, but the command doesn't really have a valid reason behind it beyond because I said so. Many think this is an example. Many might think, I actually don't know if they do think, I'm just kind of assuming. Many might think that this is an example of God just making people do things for shits and giggles. But I would argue that this is actually an example of the beauty of God. This is God showing his appreciation of the literary arts and how he has woven this story full of metaphors and symbols from the very start. It's a thread for us to follow and examine. Perhaps this thread could be used to test interpretations of the readers, as I have explained in my last video, but I would argue it's equally, if not more important, to appreciate God's artistic side. Not everything has to have a practical reason behind it. Some things can exist purely for the aesthetic. We often think it's human folly to pursue these purely creative ventures. It doesn't help anyone, really. A God as knowledgeable and powerful and responsible as we have wouldn't waste his time with such trivial things. And yet, here is an example of exactly that. But I don't personally find any fault with this. Actually, I think it's a relief. It's proof that God enjoys ultimately trivial but nonetheless cool sounding details as much as we do, or at least he sees the value in it, and it's something that he wants to integrate into this biblical story. It's proof that creativity is a part of the image of God and therefore worthy of pursuits. God did not create a world, even less so beings, with the intent of them being cold and calculating and just always thinking of the next moves. He wants us to create and appreciate creation, because that's the only way to fully appreciate him and what he's created. In fact, creating us wasn't really practical either. He didn't really have any reason for it. We're not that great, honestly. We're not very sensical beings, and he really just didn't have any reason for it other than he wanted to, and he knew he'd be pleased if he did. At least in the end, the end product at the very least is going to be great. So this love of art and creating art is a part of what connects us to him. Part of the joy of consciousness is the realization that you can just make pretty things for no reason other than it's pretty. You can look at pretty things and enjoy them for their simple prettiness, or coolness in this case. God can do harmless but delightful things simply for the satisfaction of their harmless delight, so why can't you? There's no shame in it. To love is to expand and create, so love shamelessly is what I say. And I guess you can argue that sprinkling these minute details into the story acts as a hint to God's attention to detail and his intentions with creation too. So they're not completely impractical. It just kind of proves that God doesn't just let things be random. He's guiding it toward the point. But I'd also argue that guidance is part of art. Even the artworks, it's just splashes of paint. A hand had to decide where to splash the paint. All good art is guided and crafted towards a purpose in some way. So I think the point could still be made that this is an example of God's appreciation for good art, good story specifically. So Isaac Satan Gerar for the aesthetic. Let's just see how he fared there in the next verse, which is: when the men of the place asked about his wife, he said, "Oh, she is my sister." For he was afraid to say my wife, thinking, the men of this place will kill me on account of Rebekah, for she is a beautiful woman. So there is a chance that Isaac was especially jumping in a new area with a different kind of heathen people. Before, he was likely far out in the country where few others could bother him. Though I do believe he was relatively close to the Hittite people, so it's not like he had never been around non-believers before. The only real difference is he was now in the heart of the city instead of the outskirts, and these Philistines weren't the ones that he was used to, so this possibly made him jumpy. But if you recall, Abraham had previously made a pact with Gerar not to get into any fights with each other. Even their offsprings couldn't get into fights, so unless Abraham hadn't told him that, it's hard to say why Isaac was especially wary of these people beyond country boy and the city reasons. But either way, he repeated the same lie Abraham had told them when he and Sarah were there, even after God had hyped up how obedient Abraham was. He fell into his father's sin instead. A generational curse, if ever there was one. Maybe Abraham had warned Isaac previously on how his trip to Gerar went, and it simply fell on deaf ears. Maybe Abraham didn't think what he did was all that bad, since he didn't really suffer any consequences beyond some embarrassment and a bunch of booty in all senses of the word. So Isaac thought this was not only the way to survive being in a heathen city, but gain some capital as well. Or maybe Abraham simply never told him about it, so Isaac never knew to not do that, and it was only in his genetic instincts to repeat his father's mistake. He couldn't even hide behind the fact that it was at least half true what he was saying, because Rebecca, unlike Sarah and Abraham, wasn't his sister at all, but more so a distant cousin. So he's like lying. But whatever the reason for this moral failing and lack of trust for God to protect him, Isaac lied. So let's see how this lie played out in the next verse, which is: when Isaac had been there for some time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked down from the window and was surprised to see Isaac caressing his wife, Rebekah. Abimelech sent for Isaac and said, "So she is really your wife. How could you say she is your sister?" Isaac answered him, "Because I thought I might die on account of her." Then Abimelech said, "What have you done to us? One of the people could have easily slept with your wife, and you would have brought guilt on us." So Abimelech warned all the people, "Whoever harms this man or his wife will certainly be put to death." So as is the case for generational curses, they don't often play out exactly how they did in previous generations. Sometimes it ends worse or better. It was arguably better for Isaac, since he was caught in the lie by Abimelech himself before any real adultery or pimping could take place. Maybe Isaac was smarter than his father, and he didn't let any men marry Rebecca, or maybe he was sloppier and was caught before the opportunity presented itself. Maybe God was tired of rewarding bad behavior and punishing the somewhat innocent, and sitcomed Abimelech into happenstancing upon the truth so that Isaac could learn the importance of honesty. Maybe Abimelech listened to his father, unlike Isaac, and knew to keep an eye on those sneaky foreigners with the hot sister. Whatever the case, the currently innocent Philistines of Gerar were spared from another plague brought on by an insecure man. So let's see how this turn of events worked out for everyone in the next verse, which is: So Isaac sowed seed in that land, and that year he reaped 100 times what he was sown. The Lord blessed him, and the man became rich and kept getting richer until he was very wealthy. He had flocks of sheep, herds of cattle, and many slaves, and the Philistines were envious of him. The Philistines stopped up all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the days of his father Abraham, filling them with dirt. And Abimelech said to Isaac, "Leave us. You are much too powerful for us." A backhanded compliment, if ever I heard one. So, excuse me. So instead of Isaac getting a bunch of fear or like guilt presents from Abimelech and being sent on his way, he was able to grow his wealth by his own merits and genuine blessing directly from God, a much cleaner wealth than his father had. And instead of being kicked out of the city because of fear and righteous indignation, he was kicked out because of petty jealousy. Being that he already came from a wealthy family, I wouldn't be surprised if Isaac was a little bit of a dick about being richer than everybody, as tends to be the case for the generationally wealthy. But that's not stated in the text, so it's also very likely that the Philistines by themselves were just gelling. And these blessings weren't given to Isaac because he earned them necessarily, but more because he took the opportunity from God to stay in Gerar instead of fleeing to Egypt. God had said, I'm going to bless you if you stay in this land, and he did. So he got blessed. And likely, being honest when Abimelech questioned him about his wife got him some brownie points too. He wasn't honest at first, but he didn't double down when he was caught either. It was mostly God's meddling that kept Isaac's sins from worsening by affecting others, as Abimelech's had, though. And this is often the case with generational curses. They're often impossible to break by your own will alone. And it's often purely by seizing upon the opportunity that God gives you that you can start to break them. Generational curses are roots that cause bad fruit. This is dating all the way back to Adam and Eve and their first sin. And now all humans sin because of them. If you deal with the fruits and not the roots, the patterns are going to continue. And one must fully repent of these curses in order to fully deal with them by doing something better. Of course, by deciding to do something better, Of course, this is easier said than done when you have a deep-set habit of wrongdoing. I wish I could give you simple and practical advice on how to more easily break these cycles, but I haven't even figured out how to do it for myself yet. I don't even think it's something that medical professionals really know how to do. It's kind of something us humans kind of have to deal with forever, and maybe we just kind of get a little bit better, maybe. I can certainly recognize my sin, and I know what I should do instead, yet when the opportunity arises, I fail yet again. The best recommendation I can give is just go to therapy. Try medication if necessary, at least to get your brain chemistry in better alignment. That's what I'm doing currently. I haven't found the right medication yet, but I do think it's the right move for me, just because the first 20 years of my life were relatively traumatic, so I think that just messed up my brain and how I move in the world. So I think medication was the right move for me. But you know you better than other people know you. So just that's something you're just gonna decide for yourself. But since this is a Bible study, there's also the obvious advice to pray about it. And yeah, that's probably helpful. And when you're praying about it, you gotta acknowledge specifically in your prayers what you've identified as problematic behavior and ask God how you can change it, or even more directly ask that he change it for you somehow. Maybe God can at least intervene as he did with Isaac and do some damage control. But when you finally realize, oh, you did it again, repent and pray unceasingly. Vent your frustrations about being currently unable to change. Pray he does something drastic to knock some sense into you. Maybe simply explaining why you do what you do will cause a solution to present itself. Or maybe you know the solution, but you can't quite come to terms with it. In that case, ask for bravery to face the unfaceable. That is my prayer for myself currently. I think I need to simply let go and let God, as the Christians say. But as I mentioned before, that involves constantly touching bases with God, which is kind of daunting, honestly. I'm kind of scared to beg God for changing myself. I've never really been truly angry at God before, but I know that sometimes God doesn't answer prayers, at least in the way you want him to. So I'm worried that if I keep asking and all I get is silence, my faith runs the risk of crumbling, and this faith is kind of the only thing of value that I have. Or maybe worse still, I'll get an answer, that I don't like, and be so stuck in my stubbornness to follow through, then I'll know for sure that I can never change, and it'll be completely my fault. And I'm also a little bit scared that I'm going to ask for the wrong thing, and it will delay any treatment that I need. So I'm often, like, paralyzed by indecision. Like, not like God can't discern what I need from imperfect prayers, but more I have a harder time discerning his answer if I'm not asking the right question. Like, I'm not, it's like Hitchhiker's Guide when they made that computer, and the computer said that the answer to life, the universe, and everything was 42, and we have no idea what that means. Like, why is 42 the answer? And the reason we don't know is because we didn't ask the question. So we're just like, I don't know what to make of this 42. So now we got to look for the question. It's kind of like that. So I suppose logically, I know God is patient and supportive, and if I trust the process, it'll sort itself out eventually. But my trauma gave me abandonment issues and insecurities, and I don't know how to receive patient, loving support anymore, I don't think. That kind of support has always been limited and temporary from others. I don't know if I could handle discovering God. My one constant perfection isn't any different from those who have left me. Logically, I know that this is false, but emotionally, I have a bad association with kindness, a growing suspicion, really. Then there's the worst alternative, that I am the one being unyielding and problematic, which is very possible and kind of does describe the current situation, if I'm being honest. But in that case, I can't get mad at anyone but myself, which, as a professional victim, I would not enjoy. I'm mostly just hoping that he tricks me into whatever difficult thing I need to overcome somehow, that he'll do it without me having to ask, and it'll end up being easier than I thought, and I'll feel silly for worrying about it so much. But my gut tells me this will not be the case, and I still need to pray unceasingly. And as previously stated, this is a daunting task to me, so I am thusly afraid of potential failure. But maybe by saying out loud what my anxieties are, as I have done now, it will help ease them, and therefore help me to commit to whatever task God gives me. It doesn't help that I'm pretty sure I have some kind of ADHD, so long-term focus isn't really my strong suit. But I also remember that humans can't be perfect regardless, and the best we can do is keep trying. Perfection isn't the goal, but trying is. And often after you've genuinely tried for a while, you'll find that you're at least better than you were. And that's all we can really hope for. Despite my feet dragging and anxieties and insecurities, I can at the very least keep trying with baby steps. Chip away at it, exhaust all options. Something is bound to happen eventually. And in all honesty, this isn't in the notes, but now that I have said it out loud, it does seem kind of silly. But I'm so hesitant to pray. But honestly, like I said before, I'm pretty sure I have ADHD, so half the problem is I just forget to pray about things. I'm not really in the habit of doing it when I'm upset about something, or even when I'm just neutral about something. Just praying is hard. It's definitely my weakest point. But I'm trying. I'll probably get better at it as I go on. But enough about our problems. Let's return to Isaac and see how he dealt with this sudden hostility in the next verse. I kind of forgot what the Philistines kicked him out of Gerar. That's what happened. I forgot what had previously happened. So, how does Isaac deal with this sudden hostility in the next verse? The next verse is so Isaac left. So Isaac left there, camped in the Gerar Valley, and lived there. Isaac reopened the wells that had been dug in the days of his father Abraham, and that the Philistines had stopped up after Abraham died. He gave them the same names his father had given them. Then Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found a well of spring water there. But the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen and said, "The water is ours." So he named the well Esek, because they had argued with him. Then they dug another well and quarreled over that one also. So he named it Sitnah. He moved from there and dug another, and they did not quarrel over it. He named it Rehoboth, and he said, "For now the Lord has made space for us, and we will be fruitful in this land." So the pettiness continues. Isaac goes more to the outskirts, but not completely away. Still close enough to knock boots with the local herdsmen. And they had the audacity to fill up Isaac's dead father's well. Like, oh my God. And this was in the days when wells were a necessity, not like a luxury. And they were difficult and expensive to dig out, since you're mostly just guessing where a good underwater spring is and just digging by hand. Whole towns are built around wells for this reason. So to fill up one's well, especially the ones that are a part of your late father's legacy, is to wish death and dishonor on you. Your wells aren't even good enough to steal, as precious as wells are in general are. They'd rather destroy them than use them for themselves. So such disrespect could easily start a war. But Isaac didn't want to fight, being a peaceable man, so he simply moved after trying to redig his father's wells failed. That was a tongue twister. You don't think it's a tongue twister when you're reading in your head, but when you say it out loud, you're like, trying to redig his father's wells failed. So at least I think it failed. Maybe the wells weren't in Gerar's immediate eye line, and they didn't know the wells were redug after they filled them up. Maybe the Philistines drove Isaac out after he redug the wells, but they kept the wells instead of digging, or they refilled them again. It doesn't really say, except that Isaac had to move again after he redug them. But the fact that Isaac named the wells the same thing that Abraham did implies a bit of sentimentality and pride, which is likely why it took a while for Isaac to move far enough away. It can be hard to be the bigger person and let go of things, especially when your dead father is involved and you didn't even do anything wrong. But there comes a time when you realize it's simply not a hill worth dying on, and you leave your enemies to their bitter, bitter pettiness. Before he did get the hint, though, the texts say that Isaac dug a new well in the Gerar territory for some reason, despite the obvious conflict between him and the Philistines. And the Philistines obviously had a problem with that, so Isaac named the well Esek, which means contention. So then they tried digging somewhere else, but it was still too close to Gerar, and they were forced to abandon it again. So Isaac named that well Sitnah, which means hatred. And when he finally moved far enough away that he didn't bother the Philistines, he named the well he dug there Rehoboth, which, as implied, means open space. And he thanked God for dragging him to this place where nobody's going to bother him. And it's really a great example of how God can sometimes use drama to drive you from places that aren't meant for you. It's also a great example of why you should avoid unnecessary drama. Isaac could have fought back and gotten in a big war with the Philistines, But though he was rich, his family and servants likely weren't that numerous, and there's a decent chance he would have lost. There is a time when it's necessary to fight, but God seems to be telling Isaac this is not one of those fights. And if God doesn't want you to fight, then you shouldn't fight, because it's not going to end well. Only when God says, like, okay, yeah, you should dig your heels in, that's when to go. But this is not one of those times. Save your energy for the important stuff, for the bigger stuff. And as a homeless person, I've been unfairly driven away from places I was simply existing in, by supposed neighbors, police, and even what was once my church. I often wanted to raise a fuss about it. Sometimes I even tried to, as respectfully as possible, though I'm sure it came off as annoyed at times, because I was in fact annoyed. I've tried to make it known to, whatever people, whenever I can. Just try to make it known that it's not just inconvenient for me to be forced out, but it's dehumanizing and it's terrifying as well. Like, imagine you're just in your house and then somebody's like banging on it and like, hey, you can't be here, you gotta go. And you're just like, okay, you can't do anything. You don't have any right, really, as a homeless person, to just park places sometimes. So you just gotta like leave, and a lot of times they're banging on your van at the middle of the night, which is not a fun way to wake up. So it's very stressful, is what I'm trying to say. But when I try to like talk about these things, I'm usually just met with like this silent indifference, and it just makes me want to inconvenience them as they have inconvenienced me, terrify them back even. But I get the sense that from God that now is not the right time. Right now, as with Isaac, I am but one person, with two fur babies chilling in the back. I could fight back, as others have, but like others, it would be in vain. I'd get thrown in jail, my possessions would get taken, even my dogs could be put at risk. But perhaps one day, like Isaac, my numbers will grow. It won't just be me anymore. And maybe, with God's blessing, we can actually do something about this owning class and housing crisis once and for all. That's kind of my mindset. Like, I want to do something about it eventually. Just maybe not right now. Maybe when I have more power and support, I'll try to do something about it. But until then, let's see what God does for Isaac after he finally gets settled in this new land in the next verse, which is... Okay. From there he went to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared to him that night and said, I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bless you and multiply your offspring because of my servant Abraham. So he built an altar there, called on the name of the Lord, and pitched his tent there. And Isaac's servants also dug a well there. So God recommits the covenant to Isaac as he promised he would if he stayed in Gerar. I'm just realizing I made a typo in my notes, and now it's gonna be so annoying if he stayed in Gerar. I wrote Egypt for some reason. I don't know why. If he stayed in Gerar in a similar way as he had with Abraham, by appearing randomly after a tiff with the locals. Funny how that pattern of God appearing after a fight with locals continues. Probably a rainbow after the storm kind of situation. But I would mostly like to focus on how Isaac responded. He built an altar and pitched a tent as Abraham had. He built an altar and pitched a tent as Abraham had when God spoke to him back in Genesis 13. I got it. See? But he also dug a well. Now, the altar makes enough sense. I think God speaks of blessing you. You build an altar to commemorate the occasion and worship God in return. And Isaac may want to pitch his tent for a bit to see if God returns to him in this special spot over the next few days. Like, sure, that makes sense too. Or being that God spoke to you here, you might assume this is a good spot to camp for a little bit. But Isaac digs a well on top of this. Abraham may have too, but it's specifically mentioned for Isaac. Both shelter and water are necessities for life. So this gives the impression that you're staking your life on God's promise. You're building your long-term home around it. And, you're trusting that where God said he would bless you is where you live and thrive. Just a fascinating display of faith, I think. And it was after this faithful act that a point of contention is eased, as we'll see in the next verse, which is... Now, Abimelech came to him from Gerar with Ahuzath, his advisor, and Phicol, his commander of his army. And Isaac said to them, "Why have you come to me? You hated me and sent me away." They replied, "We have clearly seen how the Lord has been with you. We think there should be an oath between two parties, between us and you. Let us make a covenant with you. You will not harm us, just as we have not harmed you, but have done only what was good to you, sending you away in peace. You are now blessed by the Lord." So he prepared a banquet for them, and they ate and drank. They got up early in the morning and swore an oath to each other. Isaac sent them on their way, and they left him in peace. On that same day, Isaac's servants came to tell him about the well they had dug, saying to him, "We have found water." He called it Sheba. Therefore the name of the city the well resides in is still Beer-sheba to this day, which means well of oaths for the uninformed. So his bad friends come crawling back to him, realizing their error. Isaac rightfully questions their intentions, since they drove him away because they're haters. But they seem to have reflected on their actions and thought better of it. Probably they sense that a man as rich and blessed as Isaac is probably not the one to piss off down the road. They even try to kind of gaslight him by saying, "We don't hate you. We were just protecting you from us. And look how God blessed you afterwards. So really, we did you a favor." Okay, sure. But despite this probably ingenuine and self-serving treaty, Isaac feels inclined to accept the offer as a man of faith and peace. Tolerating is always an improvement from haterating. But maybe also Isaac was similarly biding his time until his descendants could eventually wipe out their descendants. Just waiting until the right time to smite. Either way, they agree on peace for now and ate on it. Commentators say that Abraham was into altars and Jacob will be a tent man, but Isaac is the well guy. And as the messianic parallel, this focus on wells fits with Jesus' famous saying, "Whoever drinks from my water will never thirst again." I'm so good at butchering sentences. I swear I know how to read. So, when this peace was agreed upon, God seems to mark this good decision with a bonus and gets Isaac's well to produce water. When it rains, it pours, as they say. The theologian known as Spurgeon actually has a pretty dope quote about this, in reference to the wells that were dug in this chapter, which is paraphrased as such. "Like Isaac, you have drunk from the waters of contention and hatred, but you shall be brought to an open space where you will get an oath or a blessing from God, and your enemies shall seek your favor and glorify your Lord." So if you were paying attention to what the wells referenced here were called, you would agree that's a poetic way to put it. From contention to hatred, to contention and hatred, I should say, to free open spaces and oaths from God that bless you and curse your enemies. So yeah, that's fun. So anyways, let's end on the last verse, of which I have nothing really to say about. So it is: when Esau was 40 years old, he took as his wives Judith, daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basemath, daughter of Elon the Hittite. They made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. So yeah, Esau married 2 Canaanite women, and his parents weren't happy about it. Not much to say here. It'll be more obvious. Not really much to add. It'll be more obvious why this was a bad move in later chapters. Probably the next one. I don't know. I haven't looked. But I'll have more to say about it then. But until then, feel free to leave in any comments or questions down below. And let's move on to those pesky prayer requests. And if you want to be a part of this section, please send any thankful or needy requests in the comments or message me privately. But let's look at the ones we already have. Yes? Okay. Fantastic. Blah. What we got? Okay. So yes. No. Shouldn't be too hard. So we're going to keep praying for my cousin who is grieving the loss of her husband. And we're also going to be praying for Dr. Heiser and Trey, who are going through medical issues right now. So Dr. Heiser has cancer. Trey seems to be doing a lot better, but he did have COVID. So we're just going to pray that he doesn't have any like long-term effects, and just I guess for just the general wellness of the Naked Bible podcast, which they host. And I guess I should also pray for myself. You know, like I said, I've been a bit depressed lately. I don't know if you could tell. I've been a bit depressed. I kind of feel like I'm seeing the problems that I am a part of in my life, and I'm not totally sure if I'm gonna be able to fix them. Probably I can't do it by myself. I'm probably gonna need help, and that stresses me out because usually when I involve people in my life, it just makes me feel worse rather than better. Like it starts good and then it ends bad, you know, and I think it's worse because it started good and I had hope for a minute, and then I was met with more disappointment. So yeah, I don't know. I guess pray that God fixes it, because I don't think I can by myself. So anyway, let's pray. Okay. Lovely God, who I love so much. I just want to, first of all, general prayer that of apology of any sins that we have committed as a people. If there's anything that we aren't aware of, I pray that you bring it to our attention so that we can fix it. If we do know about it, I pray that you give us some guidance on how to go forward with that and repent of that. But you know, back to the things that, other things that we need, more material things. Like, I don't know if it even is material, but I'd like to pray for my cousin who is grieving the loss of her husband. She seems to be handling it relatively well in a pretty healthy way. So we just pray that it keeps going like that. But you know, I'm sure there's her weak moments and those moments where she's just hit with a wave of depression. So I just pray that she's not like succumbing to that when those happen. She's able to keep her eyes on you, and she's able to like manage the best that she can, and she's able to rely on you and the people in her life to the best of her abilities. I'd also like to pray for Dr. Heiser and Trey of the Naked Bible podcast. I pray that you heal Dr. Heiser of his cancer, if possible. That's our preference, so we pray that you do that. Also like to pray for Trey that he is not suffering any long-term effects of COVID. I should probably just like look up probably has it on his Twitter, whether he's good or not. But you know, just praying for their general health and well-being. At the very least, trying to keep their spirits up and their long-term sights intact. Keep those sights on you, as I always say. And just like generally, I'd like to pray for the Naked Bible podcast. It's just such a great addition to the resources that Christian laymen can access, and I just pray that you can keep it going strong no matter what's going on with our two lovely hosts. So yeah, to do that. And I also like to pray for myself. I mean, you know what it is. I've been kind of an anxious mess, and the anxiety will turn into depression, and it's just so depressing. And like I get the feeling that I'm supposed to be letting people into my life, but I'm like scared too, because every time I do, I just get stabbed in my heart. So I don't know, I guess help me do that. I think like at the very least, help me to be more open with you, because I think that's kind of part of the problem. Is it's hard for me to remember that when things are getting rough, that I need to turn to you. When things are going good, I turn to you. I'm just like praying unceasingly, no matter what's going on in my life. So just help me to have a better relationship with you. I mean, you know how like ditzy and forgetful and just like caught up in my own world I can be. So just pray that you like interrupt it. You know how like sometimes you'll just like pop into my head randomly. I think that's the best way to do it. So just keep doing that. Just, I don't know, like whatever else I need. I don't know if I can change the things about myself that I want to change. All these behavioral problems and like insecurities. But you know, I mean, I probably can't, but I know you can. So I guess I just pray that you help me to do that, because I don't know how to do that. So just, you know, give me some guidance on that, I guess, and help me to not be so terrified to ask you for help, and just in general, give me the strength to do the things that I need to do to break these generational curses and heal this trauma that I have. I'm probably going to be kicking and screaming the whole time, but you know, you are a patient and loving God, so that's kind of what I'm staking my hope on. So just pray that you stick with me through that. Like, I do want to change, but I also don't, because changing is hard, but I know that I need to change, so just help me to do it. Yeah, you know what I'm trying to say, you know what I need, and I'm just gonna hope that you get the drift, and I don't need to say it any other way, because you already know what I need, so it's fine. Anyways, well, that's all I have to say, so thanks for listening. Okay, bye, amen. Did a prayer. I'm always excited when I end it, because it was so stressful. It's so stressful. Like, I'm not too bad at talking to God privately in my head. Like, I don't get as anxious, but when it's like out loud in public, there's just like a lot of stress all of a sudden. You know, I got some stage fright when it comes to public prayers. Anyways, as I said before, questions and comments, or just like prayer requests, whether they be good or bad, let me know in the comments or message me if you want. But that's pretty much it for the Bible study. As always, I like to end with a loud worship song. I can't play it here because of copyright reasons. But for those on YouTube, if you just go into the description, I'm sure you already saw it. There's a loud worship link for you there. Just go on and watch that after this video is done. And for those on Facebook, just scroll up. It's right there. Okay? Okay. Well, see you in 2 weeks. Okay, bye.